I regretted everything, the tequila, the whiskey, whatever that god-awful blue drink had been, regretted it all. My head pounded like a drum solo, and the sun filtering through the massive oak tree above me wasn't helping. I took a slow sip of coffee, willing the caffeine to work its magic, but all it did was burn my tongue. Fantastic. I leaned my head back against the rough bark, shutting my eyes, promising myself I'd never drink again, until the next party at least. The campus buzzed around me, students rushing to their next class, chatting in clusters, laughter carrying through the late morning air. It was all background noise, until I heard the sniffle. It was quiet, almost drowned out by the rustling leaves, but unmistakable. A tiny hiccuping breath followed, the kind that came from someone trying and failing to hold back tears. I cracked one eye open, debating. Not my problem. People cried on campus all the time. Bad grades, breakups, existential crises over whether they'd picked the wrong major. Whoever it was, they'd figure it out. I should just finish my coffee and leave them to it. Another sniff, then a muffled sob. I exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over my face. Curiosity, or maybe something else, tugged at me. I turned my head, searching for the source. A girl sat a few feet away, her knees drawn up, fingers curled tight around her phone. Red hair twisted into a loose, messy bun, strands falling around her face, which was hidden behind thick-rimmed glasses. She wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, sneakers scuffed at the toes. Nothing flashy, nothing remarkable. And yet, she was crying, not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet, desperate tears sliding down her cheeks, her lips pressed together like she didn't want to make a sound. Something in my chest squeezed. Before I could look away, her phone buzzed. She sniffed, wiped at her face, then cleared her throat. By the time she answered, the transformation was instant. "Hi, Mom." "Yeah, I'm great." Her voice was bright, cheerful, so damn convincing I almost believed it myself. No, I just got out of class. How's the bakery?" "Bakery?" Her voice danced through the air, light and warm as she chatted, her fingers twisting into the hem of her shirt. No trace of the sadness from seconds ago. She laughed at something, a sound so genuine it made my pulse trip. Even though I knew it was a lie, she was pretending. For them, why? The question lodged itself in my throat. I should have looked away, should have left her to whatever battle she was fighting, but I couldn't. Then, as if sensing me, she glanced up. Blue eyes met mine, still glossy from tears, still raw with whatever pain she was hiding. My breath caught. The world slowed. It lasted a few seconds at best before she stood and lifted her chin, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. Not in class, not as I walked across campus, not even as I lounged on the rooftop with Max and Rory, watching the sun dip below the skyline. She had completely wrecked my focus. I barely knew her. I didn't even get her name, but the image of her, sitting under the tree, wiping away tears, then smiling through them like nothing was wrong, had burned itself into my brain. I regretted not following her, not asking more, not saying something better than, "Who are you?" "You good, man?" Max asked, tossing a bottle cap at me. I blinked. "Huh?" "You've been weirdly quiet," Rory added, stretching his long legs out in front of him. "Did some girl finally reject the Great Charles clock?" Max snorted. "That'd be a first." I rolled my eyes, but my stomach twisted at how close they were to the truth. She had dismissed me, like I was nothing, like I wasn't worth her time, and for the first time in my life, I didn't like it. We stayed on the rooftop until the air got chilly, the sky turning a deeper shade of blue. As we headed down the stairs, I was still lost in my thoughts, and that's when I bumped into someone. Something cold and sticky splashed across my chest. I looked down. Juice all over my jacket, my expensive custom-tailored jacket. "Shit," the person gasped. "I am so sorry." I knew that voice. My head snapped up. Her. She froze, holding an empty cup, her blue eyes wide in horror. The same girl from under the tree, the girl I hadn't stopped thinking about all day. Max and Rory started talking at the same time. Something about "dude, your jacket, and what are the chances?" but their voices faded into the background, because at that moment nothing else existed, just her.
The universe was mocking me. There was no other explanation. First, I'd gotten the email about my scholarship being in jeopardy. I was in my 4th year, so close to the finish line, but my grades had slipped. I knew why. Too many extra shifts at the diner, too many nights stumbling into bed, too exhausted to study. But what was I supposed to do? My parents' bakery was barely staying afloat, and I couldn't just let them struggle alone. Then, as if my day couldn't get worse, I ran into him, twice. The first time had been under the oak tree, when I'd let my emotions get the better of me. I never let myself cry in public, but exhaustion and stress had won. And he had been there, watching, looking at me like I was some puzzle he wanted to solve. And now I'd managed to spill juice on him. Of all the people in this entire university, thousands of students, dozens of staircases, of course I had to crash into Charles' clock and ruin his undoubtedly expensive designer jacket. Just my luck. I know exactly who Charles' clock is. The moment he steps into a room, you can tell, without a shadow of a doubt, that he's that kind of rich, hot guy. I'm not exaggerating when I say he's the heir to a massive fortune. Old money runs through his veins, and it shows in every impeccable detail of his appearance. Standing over 6 feet tall, Charles carries himself with an effortless confidence that borders on arrogance. His sharp jawline and high cheekbones give his face a sculpted, almost chiseled look, as if he were carved out of marble by some master artisan. His dark brown hair falls perfectly into place, every strand exactly where it should be, complementing his slate-gray eyes that seem to hold secrets of wealth and privilege, and which can make anyone feel both small and seen at the same time. The first time I saw him, I was in the midst of a mundane day, and he just walked in. Instantly, the atmosphere changed. Conversations hushed, and every head turned as if compelled by an invisible force. It's as if he doesn't just enter a room, he commands it. Even if I try to convince myself that I shouldn't be affected, I can't help but feel both annoyed and inexplicably drawn to him. Annoying, because he represents everything I never had. An easy life, endless luxury, and a charm that seems to work on everyone except me. And yet, it's impossible to ignore the magnetism of his presence. I sometimes catch myself watching him from afar, trying to understand the mystery behind those piercing eyes. There's a grace in the way he moves, a deliberate ease in every gesture, and a silent assurance that his status precedes him. It's infuriating, really, this blend of entitlement and undeniable allure. When he smiles, it's not just a smile. It's a promise that he's above the trivialities of the world, that his world is different, and perhaps a bit more dazzling. So yes, Charles' clock is more than just a pretty face with a hefty bank account. He's a walking declaration of old money, privilege, and the kind of beauty that makes you wish you could trade places, even if just for a moment. And though I might try to push away the fascination and frustration he stirs within me, I can't help but feel that every time he enters a room, my world tilts ever so slightly off its axis. He barely reacted, just stared at me. His 2 friends, Max and Rory, if I remembered correctly, weren't as composed. They laughed, hooted, and smacked him on the back like this was some grand joke. Well, that's one way to get his attention, Rory teased. Max grinned. Maybe he should spill something on you next, huh? I internally groaned and stepped back, gripping my empty cup so tightly it crumpled in my hand. I'm sorry about your jacket, I said flatly, though I wasn't sure I meant it. It's just juice. He shrugged like it didn't matter, which only annoyed me more. Of course it didn't matter. Why would it? He could buy 100 new ones without blinking. He took a step forward, offering his hand. I'm Charles. I know who you are, I cut in before he could finish. Everyone knew who he was, the golden boy, the heir to a billion-dollar empire, the guy who had never had to check his bank balance before buying something, never had to juggle school and 3 part-time jobs just to keep a roof over his head. I ignored his outstretched hand. Silence stretched between us, his expression flickered, but I didn't wait to analyze it. I hitched my bag higher on my shoulder, nodded once, and turned away. Behind me, his friends laughed, jostling him like he'd just lost some sort of game. But he'd be fine. He wouldn't lose sleep over this, over me. People like him never did. By the time I got home, home being the small apartment above our struggling bakery, I was exhausted. But exhaustion didn't matter, not when I had work to do. I grabbed the worn blackboard from inside and dragged it to the sidewalk, chalk dust clinging to my fingers as I scribbled the words that made my stomach twist. 50% off all breads. A desperate move. A last-ditch effort to bring in customers. I stepped back, staring at the sign, the knot in my throat tightening. I hated this. Hated seeing my parents work themselves to the bone. Hated knowing that no matter how delicious our bread was, people would always choose the shiny, overpriced cafes over a no-name, out-of-the-way bakery. I wanted to cry, but crying didn't change anything. Instead, I grabbed a rag and started cleaning the outdoor tables. Again. I was wiping down the same spot for the third time when someone clears their throat behind me. I knew that sound. I closed my eyes for half a second, took a breath, and turned around. Charles' clock. Of course, because today hadn't been miserable enough. "Are you following me?" I snapped. He didn't even look guilty. In fact, he smirked, shoving his hands into the pockets of his very much ruined designer jacket. "Would it make you feel better if I denied it?" "Not really." "Then I won't." I opened my mouth, ready to tell him exactly what I thought about rich guys who didn't understand the meaning of boundaries, when my mom stepped outside. "Oh, a customer," she said brightly, wiping her hands on her apron. "Wait, nope." "Not this." Charles turned to her with the same effortless charm he probably used on society elites and business moguls. "Charles' clock," he said, shaking her hand. "I go to the same university as Cora." My mom's eyes lit up. "Oh no. Really? Cora never brings anyone from school?" "I can't imagine why," Charles murmured, side-eyeing me. I glared. And because my suffering wasn't complete, my dad and Ethan, my 10-year-old brother, appeared in the doorway. Within seconds, Charles had all of them under his spell, chatting with them like they'd been lifelong friends. Then, as if the entire universe was conspiring against me, he bought everything on display. Every last loaf. "I'll be back," he told my parents. "And next time, I'll bring my friends." I stood there, arms crossed, scowling, as he strolled down the sidewalk, a paper bag full of bread in his hand. The moment he was out of earshot, I stormed after him. "What do you want from me?" He turned, mid-bite of a croissant, looking entirely too pleased with himself. "Who says I want anything?" He grinned. "I told you, I was hungry, and I happen to love bread." And with that, he walked away, leaving me standing there, fists clenched, heart racing.
I'd never had trouble with women before. They usually flocked to me, some bolder than others, some playing coy, but all of them wanting something. My attention, my name, my wealth. It didn't bother me. It was just the way things were. But Cora, she was different, and not in some manic pixie dream girl kind of way. No, she was ice-cold indifference wrapped in a messy bun and thick-rimmed glasses. I could feel it, that wall of defense she'd built so high, so impenetrable, that not even a polite smile slipped through. She looked at me like I was nothing, just another rich boy with too much time and too little struggle. It wasn't just unusual, it was infuriating. And now, as I sat on the rooftop of our usual spot, a croissant in one hand, the bag of bread I'd bought from her family's bakery beside me, I found myself wondering, would I ever get the chance to break through? The door behind me creaked open, and then Max and Rory stepped onto the rooftop. "There you are," Rory said, dropping onto a chair. "Thought you died or something." Max stretched, then squinted at me. "Yeah, what the hell? You missed the party last night." I smirked, taking a bite of my croissant. "Had somewhere else to be." Rory gaped at me. "More important than a party?" "More important than that party," I corrected. Max raised a brow. "Let me guess. Had something to do with the girl you followed?" I didn't answer. "Just kept chewing." Rory let out a laugh. "Wait, back up. Followed? What is this? A rom-com?" Max ignored him, eyes still locked on me. "You know, I actually know who she is." Something in my chest tightened. It was a ridiculous reaction. I barely knew Cora, and yet jealousy curled in my stomach like a slow-burning fire. "You know her?" I asked, my voice too casual. Max snorted. "Not personally, but I've heard about her." I leaned forward. Go on. Max stretched out his legs, looking amused. Remember last year, when the football team's captain was after some girl and got publicly rejected? Vaguely, football guys were dramatic about everything, especially their wounded pride. That was her, Max said. Cora Cooper, football guy, tried hard. Flowers, coffee, the works. But she ignored him. Blatantly. I shouldn't have been surprised. And get this, Max continued, grinning. Hockey player tried too. Got the same treatment. People started calling her the Ice Queen because she prefers books over people. The name suited her. Cora Cooper. The Ice Queen. But something about it didn't sit right with me. Because yesterday, under that massive oak tree, I'd seen her crying. I'd seen her crack. And I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than the reputation she carried. After my last class of the day, I did something completely out of character. I went to the library, not because I had assignments to catch up on, not that I couldn't if I wanted to, but because, according to Max, Cora spent a lot of time here. And he was right. Tucked into a corner by the window, her red hair pinned up in a messy bun, was Cora, completely engrossed in a book bigger than her head. I leaned against the nearest bookshelf, watching her for a moment, her brow furrowed as she flipped a page, her lips moving slightly like she was reading something in her head. She didn't notice me. I smirked. Then, moving with deliberate slowness, I walked over and sat on the table right in front of her. She didn't look up. "Is there a daily special?" I asked. She blinked, barely sparing me a glance. "What?" "At the bakery." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the edge of the table. "Do you guys have daily specials? You know, like a bread of the day?" Her book snapped shut. Her blue eyes locked onto mine, suspicious, annoyed, and completely unimpressed. "Are you seriously here to ask about my family's bakery?" she asked. I grinned. "What else would I be here for?" She scoffed, setting the book down. "You don't seem like the type to read anything that isn't a stock report or a yacht catalogue." "That hurts, Ice Queen," I said, dramatically clutching my chest. Her glare intensified. "Don't call me that." I smirked. "Why not?" "It suits you." She huffed, picking up her book again. "Shouldn't you be at some fancy event drinking champagne with other rich people?" "Nah. Turns out I have a sudden interest in literature." I tapped the book in her hands. "War and Peace? Light reading? None of your business." She flipped a page aggressively, clearly done with me. I chuckled but leaned back, letting her study. I expected her to ignore me completely, and she tried. But every so often I caught her sneaking a glance, as if checking to see if I was still there. I was. I waited exactly 30 minutes before stretching my arms and standing. Cora's head snapped up, and she glared at me like I'd committed a crime. "Leaving already?" she asked dryly. "I'm hungry," I said, shoving my hands into my pockets. "Going to your bakery." Her mouth parted slightly, eyes narrowing in disbelief. I winked. "See you there, Ice Queen." And before she could argue, I walked away, leaving her speechless for the second time that week.
By the time I got home, the warm scent of garlic and butter filled the air, drifting down the narrow hallway leading to our kitchen. That was strange. My parents usually kept the bakery open until 9, doing everything they could to scrape by. But it was barely 7, and they were already in the kitchen, moving around with an ease I hadn't seen in a long time. My mom was at the stove, stirring something in a pan, while my dad chopped vegetables beside her. Ethan sat at the table, swinging his legs as he watched them, looking more relaxed than he had in weeks. Something about the whole scene put me on edge. I set my bag down and crossed my arms. Did he come back? My mom turned, wiping her hands on a towel. "Who?" I sighed. "Charles." Her eyes lit up, and that made my stomach tighten. "Oh, yes. And he brought his friends this time," she said excitedly. "Such nice young men. They took pictures of everything, said they wanted to help promote us." My fingers curled into my palm. "And they bought everything again," my dad chuckled. "They sure did. Ethan even got to tell them about his favorite pastries. And they bought extras just because he recommended them." I glanced at my little brother, who grinned at me. genuinely happy for the first time in a while. And that was what did it. That twisting frustration in my chest turned into full-blown anger. Charles' clock was giving my parents false hope. They thought this sudden boost in business was real, but it wasn't. It was just some bored rich guy throwing his money around like it meant nothing. What would happen when he lost interest? When he and his equally rich friends stopped showing up? My parents would think they had finally caught a break, only to be disappointed when reality set in. I swallowed back the lump in my throat, forcing my voice to stay calm. You shouldn't depend on him. He's not going to keep coming back. My mom frowned, setting her towel down. You don't know that. Yes, I did. Because I knew people like him. He was playing a game, and we were just another way to keep himself entertained. I clenched my jaw, my pulse quickening. I was going to talk to him tomorrow, and this time he was going to listen. The next morning, I slung my bag over my shoulder, preparing to leave for school, when I stopped dead in my tracks. There was a line outside the bakery, a long one. People stood on the sidewalk, some checking their phones, others chatting as they waited. The line stretching past 2 storefronts down. I blinked, convinced I was still half asleep. What the hell was going on? I turned to my mom, who was rushing back and forth between the counter and the shelves of freshly baked donuts. Mom? She barely spared me a glance. Not now, sweetheart. We're busy. But, go to school, she said, shooing me toward the door. We'll talk later. I opened my mouth to argue, but my dad was already at the register, ringing up customers, and Ethan was carefully packing up orders behind the counter, looking so proud of himself. They were happy. Confused, I pulled out my phone as I walked to the bus stop. A quick scroll through social media answered everything. Maximum. Rory. Some of their friends. They had posted everything. Photos of our display. Videos of them raving about the pastries. A caption from Rory that said, "Best bakery in town, no contest." And of course, Charles' Clock's post, which had the most traction. A simple picture of a croissant on a plate, steam still rising from it, with the caption, "Made with love. Get yours while you can." I groaned, rubbing a hand down my face. This was his doing. Again. I walked into campus with a storm brewing in my chest, prepared to march right up to him and demand an answer. But the second I entered the dining hall, I spotted him sitting at a table with Max and Rory, casually drinking his coffee like he hadn't just completely turned my life upside down. I stomped over, my heart pounding. Before I could even open my mouth, Max grinned at me. "Cora, that bakery of yours? Amazing," Rory nodded enthusiastically. "Seriously, I don't know how you've been keeping it a secret. The Danishes? Life-changing." I stared at them, momentarily thrown off. Charles simply smirked at me over his cup. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. His blue eyes were locked onto mine, completely unapologetic. He knew what he did. He wasn't sorry. And the worst part? I had no idea why he was doing it. I swallowed, shifting on my feet. The words I wanted to say, "Stop interfering. Stop giving my parents false hope. Stop acting like you care," felt wrong now. Because for once, my family wasn't stressed. They were hopeful, excited. And it was because of him. I sighed heavily, my voice barely above a mumble. "Thanks." Then, before he could respond, I turned on my heel and ran out of there like a coward. Because the real problem wasn't Charles. It was me. And I had no idea why he got under my skin like this.
The mansion was quiet when I arrived home. It always was. The staff greeted me as I walked in, polite, professional, distant, the way my parents liked it. No unnecessary chatter, no warmth. Dinner was already set on the massive dining table, a 5-course meal prepared by one of our chefs, plated like something out of a Michelin-starred restaurant. I barely glanced at it before sitting down. The chandelier above cast a soft glow on the pristine white tablecloth. The polished silverware gleamed under the light. Across from me, an empty seat. It had been empty for as long as I could remember. My parents were never home for dinner. Business meetings, charity galas, private jet trips to wherever. Their way of parenting was making sure my credit card never declined. I cut into my steak, taking a slow bite, but I barely tasted it. My mind was somewhere else, or rather, on someone else. I pulled out my phone and saw the text from Rory. House party at Mason's. You in? I stared at the message, thumb hovering over the screen. Normally, the idea of a party, loud music, drinks, a different girl on my arm by the end of the night would have been an instant yes. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like it. I exhaled, setting my phone down, because all I could think about was her, Cora, the way she had stormed into the dining hall, ready to fight me, the way her glare faltered when she realized what I'd done, the way she had hesitated, her lips parting just slightly, before she, grudgingly, painfully, thanked me. And then she ran, like she was more afraid of her own feelings than of me. I smirked to myself, pushing my plate away. I'd never met anyone like her, and I wasn't done with her yet. 10 minutes later, I drove my car out of the iron gates. I should have gone to the party. That's what I kept telling myself as I gripped the steering wheel, my car slicing through the near-empty streets. But instead of heading to Mason's house, I found myself pulling up to a small, dimly lit bakery. Cora's bakery. It was already closed, the sign flipped over, the windows dark. But outside, a figure struggled with a massive sack of flour, nearly tipping over as he tried to balance it against his chest. Her dad. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Before I could talk myself out of it, I got out of the car and walked over. Let me help. He looked up, startled. Oh, I didn't wait for him to argue. I grabbed one of the heavy sacks, slinging it over my shoulder like I had done this a million times before. I hadn't, of course, but he didn't need to know that. We moved the rest inside, stacking them near the kitchen. The air was warm and smelled like fresh bread and cinnamon, a far cry from the cold, sterile halls of my house. By the time we were done, my black shirt was covered in smudges of white flour, and that's exactly when Cora walked in. She stopped short, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. Her dad brushing flour off his hands, me standing there in designer clothes, absolutely ruined. I could practically see the gears turning in her head. Don't tell me, she said slowly, folding her arms. You actually did manual labor? I smirked. Try not to sound so impressed. I'm not. You sure? I dusted off my shirt, watching as more flour puffed into the air. Because I think I just earned a badge of honor. Cora's dad chuckled, patting my shoulder. The boy's got a good work ethic. I like him. Cora muttered something under her breath, but before she could properly insult me, her mom popped out from the kitchen. Oh, Charles, since you're here, why don't you join us for dinner? I blinked. Dinner at their place? Cora whipped around. Mom, no. Her mom ignored her, already ushering me toward the stairs. It's nothing fancy, but it's nice to have company. I hesitated. I wasn't used to this, people offering me something without expecting anything in return. Then I thought about my own house, the empty dining table, the cold food made by chefs who never ate with me. I smiled. I'd love to. I had never enjoyed a meal more. The dining table was small, a little crowded, but it was alive. Cora's dad told stories about his younger days. Her mum laughed and teased him, and her little brother Ethan nearly choked on his food from laughing too hard at my expense. Even Cora, despite her obvious annoyance, joined in, rolling her eyes between bites but not actually kicking me out. At one point, she pointed her fork at me. Just so we're clear, this doesn't mean I like you. Her mum gasped. Cora, be nice. I grinned, leaning back in my chair. She's been nice. That was practically a love confession. Ethan giggled. Cora kicked me under the table. It was perfect. I didn't know how long I stayed, but by the time I left, I realized something strange. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to go home.
I walked him to his car, arms folded, trying to ignore the way my heart wouldn't settle. It was just a walk, just a thank you. But it didn't feel like just anything. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of warm bread and autumn leaves. The streetlights cast long shadows, and every step I took beside Charles felt like crossing some invisible line I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. When we reached his car, a sleek black sports car that looked absurd in front of our tiny bakery, I turned to him. Thanks, I said, clearing my throat, for, helping my dad. His lips quirked up. That almost sounded sincere. I rolled my eyes. Don't ruin it. A low chuckle. His hands were in his pockets. His stance relaxed. But there was something in his eyes. Something hesitant. Like he was debating whether to say something. Then he did. Come with me to the senior ball. I blinked. The words were so unexpected that for a second, I thought I misheard him. I stared at him, searching for the joke. But there was none. Why me? I asked. Because I honestly didn't know how else to respond. His gaze didn't waver. Why not? I scoffed. You could take anyone, literally anyone. He shrugged, as if the answer were obvious. I don't want just anyone. I swallowed, something tight curling in my chest. I wanted to believe him, but I wasn't stupid. My walls went up. Did you make a bet about me, Charles? I asked, my voice quiet but firm. His expression instantly darkened. What? I lifted my chin. I know some of the guys like to make bets. Who can take me out? Who can sleep with me? His jaw clenched so hard I thought I heard his teeth grind. Tell me their names. I blinked. I expected defensiveness, a joke, a smirk. Not this. Not the sharp edge to his voice. The way his entire body went tense, like he was ready to throw a punch. I shook my head, suddenly feeling warm tendrils wrap around me, pulling me closer to something I wasn't sure I could handle, something I wasn't sure I wanted to handle. No, I murmured. Forget it. I won't. His voice was low, controlled. I'll find out who they are and make them apologize to you. I frowned. Honestly, you don't need to do that. No, I don't. His blue eyes held mine, unwavering. But I will. A shiver ran down my spine, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. Something I wasn't ready to name. Before I could say another word, he turned, walking to his car. I watched his broad back as he slid into the driver's seat, the engine purring to life. And then he was gone, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding, my fingers curled into my sweater. What the hell just happened? And why did I feel so hyper-aware of his presence, even when he wasn't there?
I wasn't the kind of guy who made promises lightly, and when I did, I kept them. It didn't take long to find out who the three idiots were. This school ran on gossip, and people were quick to spill names when I asked the right questions. By lunchtime the next day, I had them cornered. They were sitting at their usual table in the dining hall, laughing over their trays of food, completely oblivious to what was coming. I didn't give them a chance to react. I walked up, towering over them, and said loud enough for half the hall to hear, "You're going to apologize to Cora." The laughter died instantly. One of them, Ryan, frowned. Apologize? For what? I leaned down slightly, my voice lethal and low. For the bet, for being complete scumbags, and for thinking I wouldn't find out. Their faces paled. I could see them scrambling for an excuse, but I didn't give them the chance. You have two options, I said, straightening. One, you walk over to Cora and apologize, right here, right now. I let my words sink in before adding, or two, I drag your sorry asses over there myself and make you apologize while the entire school watches. Silence. I tilted my head. What's it gonna be? The three exchanged panicked glances before practically tripping over themselves to get up. I followed behind as they shuffled toward Cora's usual table. She was sitting there, eating alone, completely unaware of the show about to unfold. She looked up just as they reached her. Ryan swallowed hard. Cora, we wanted to say we're sorry. For the bet, the second guy, James, added quickly. We were being idiots, the third mumbled. The entire dining hall had gone silent. Cora's eyes widened in shock. Her grip on her fork tightened. You... what? I stepped forward, crossing my arms. They're sorry, Cora, aren't they? Ryan nodded frantically. Yeah, really sorry. James wiped sweat from his forehead. Super sorry. Won't happen again, the last one promised. I scanned the room, making sure everyone was paying attention, then said loudly, if I ever hear about anyone making bets on women again, especially Cora, they're going to have to stand here and sing an apology. A few chuckles broke out. Someone whistled. The three guys practically ran out of the dining hall. I turned back to Cora. She was shy, clearly mortified, But there was also something else in her expression, something she wasn't sure she wanted to admit. A small, reluctant smile, the Ice Queen showing cracks in her armor. She cleared her throat. That was unnecessary, I smirked. Maybe. She hesitated, then mumbled, thanks. I leaned down slightly, just enough for only her to hear. Any time, Ice Queen. She gaped at me as I turned and walked away. My work here done. At this point, the Coopers expected me. Every other night, I showed up at the bakery, rolling up my sleeves and hauling bags of flour like I wasn't wearing a shirt that probably cost more than the entire stock of bread on display. Cora ignored me half the time, her face buried in her books, her brows knitted in deep focus. If she wasn't studying, she was working extra shifts at the diner. The girl never stopped. I wasn't sure when it happened, but somewhere between watching her boss around customers with a no-nonsense attitude and seeing the way she lit up whenever her little brother told her about his day, I realized I was in deep trouble. One evening, after I finished stacking a fresh shipment of supplies, Mr. Cooper clapped a hand on my shoulder. Come sit, son. I tensed. The dad talk. The bakery was closed for the night, the scent of baked goods still lingering in the air. Mrs. Cooper was in the back cleaning up, while Cora had already left for a shift at the diner. I sat across from him, unsure if I should be nervous. He steepled his fingers together. I'm going to ask you something, and I expect an honest answer. I met his gaze. Okay. What's your deal with my daughter? There it was. I could have dodged the question, could have made a joke, but I respected this man. And more than that, I respected Cora. So I said the truth. I like her, I admitted, my voice steady. More than I probably should. His face remained unreadable. You don't come from the same world, you know. I know. She's worked hard for everything she has. You've been handed everything. I nodded slowly. I know that too. He studied me for a long moment, then leaned back. She's not impressed by big, grand gestures. She never has been. She appreciates the small things, the things that actually mean something. I took that in. She doesn't trust easily, he continued, his voice softer. So if you're planning to stick around, prove to her that you're not just here for the thrill of the chase. I nodded, my chest tightening with something I couldn't name. Then he stood, dusting off his hands. Come on then. I frowned. Where? To the kitchen. You're going to help me bake. I blinked. What? He chuckled. Cora's favorite cookies. We're making a batch. I wasn't sure whether to be honored or terrified, but I followed him into the kitchen anyway. That night, under her dad's careful instructions, I burned the first batch, underbaked the second, and finally got the third right. The next morning, I slipped into the library and left a small box of cookies at her usual study spot. No note and no explanation. I didn't need one because she would know. Just a small thing. Something that actually meant something.
It was just a seat. That's what I told myself as I stood there, staring at my usual place in the library, which was currently occupied. A girl I vaguely recognized was sitting where I always did, leaning forward excitedly as she whispered to her group of friends. They were huddled together, giggling, eyes darting toward the small box of cookies sitting on the table. I wasn't sure why my stomach twisted. With a sigh, I settled at the desk across from them, pulling out my books. I had an exam to study for. I didn't have time to care about some random box of cookies. But then, I swear on my life, I saw him leave it. My ears perked up despite myself. No way, another girl gasped. Charles' clock? The Charles' clock? I stared at my book, my fingers tightening over the page. The first girl nodded eagerly. I came in early, and there he was, setting it down like some romance novel hero. Oh my God, someone sighed dreamily. Is he about to ask you out? Heat prickled up my neck. Maybe this is how he's asking you to the ball, another girl whispered excitedly. Like a secret admirer thing. My throat closed. I didn't know what exactly I had been expecting when I saw those cookies. But I hadn't been expecting this. Suddenly, my book blurred before me. My chest felt tight. My thoughts an incoherent mess. This was stupid. It wasn't mine. It was never meant for me. And yet, a single tear slid down my cheek. I quickly wiped it away, angry at myself. Enough. I snapped my book shut, shoving it into my bag. My hands were shaking as I stood, moving swiftly toward the exit. And then I crashed into a solid wall of warmth. Oof! Strong hands gripped my arms, steadying me. I didn't need to look up. I already knew who it was. Charles, his brow furrowed. Whoa! Hey! I jerked away from his hold, humiliated, heart pounding. His gaze searched my face, and I could tell he saw it. The redness in my eyes, the frustration tightening my lips. His expression shifted. Cora, I have to go, I muttered, stepping past him. But before I could take another step, his fingers brushed my wrist, soft and barely there. I swallowed hard, staring straight ahead. Talk to me, he said, voice lower. I exhaled slowly, pulling away. There's nothing to talk about. And then I walked away, leaving him behind this time. I should have kept walking. Should have ignored him, should have left before he could look at me like that. Like he actually cared. But Charles' clock had a way of getting under my skin, even when I didn't want him to. What's wrong, Cora? I opened my mouth to respond, except I never got the chance. Because just then, a girl rushed toward him, beaming. Oh my God, Charles, she gushed, stopping right beside us. Thank you for the cookies. That was so sweet. How did you even know I liked sweets? The world stopped. I froze. Charles blinked, looked at her, then at me. Confusion flickered across his face. But I wasn't sticking around for an explanation. I turned on my heel and bolted. Cora, wait. His voice was right behind me. I didn't stop. Cora, damn it, stop running. Leave me alone, Charles, I snapped, not looking back. What did I do? I whirled around so fast he almost collided into me. His expression was a mixture of exasperation and concern, his chest rising and falling like he had just sprinted after me. I clenched my fists. Did you make a bet on me? His face darkened immediately. No, what? Why would you think that? I swallowed. My throat was dry. Because you just asked that girl to the ball after you asked me. His entire body stiffened. Then he cursed, low, rough, frustrated. Oh, damn it, no, Cora. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. That was for you. I left it at your seat, the one I know you always occupy. I blinked, my mind reeling. She sat there first. Shit! His eyes widened like the realization had just hit him. The back of those cookies spelled your name. We stood there. A long, heavy silence stretched between us. Then, almost hesitantly, he took a step forward. I meant what I said before, Cora. I wasn't playing games with you. I swallowed again, the anger slowly unraveling into something else, something warm, something dangerous. Then, are you still asking me to the ball? Charles let out a breath. Then, his lips curled into a slow, crooked grin. Well, yeah, he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And despite myself, despite everything, I felt my own lips tug upward. Fine, I muttered, crossing my arms. I'll go with you, his grin widened. Good. I wasn't planning on taking anyone else.
Why are you nervous? It's just a ball, Max said, leaning against his car and fixing his hair. I'm not nervous, I shot back, straightening my tie for what felt like the 100th time. Rory snorted. Right. That's why you've been checking your reflection every 5 minutes like some lovesick teenager. Max chuckled. I hate to say it, man, but you are acting like one. I scowled at them, but deep down I knew they weren't wrong. I didn't know why I felt this way. Maybe because tonight wasn't just about some stupid dance. Maybe because tonight was the night I'd finally officially asked Cora out. The thought made my stomach tighten. I'd never been nervous about asking out a girl before. But this was different. She was different. I waited outside her bakery with her parents, standing awkwardly beside them as her mom fussed over her phone, and her dad kept sneaking glances at me like he still wasn't sure whether to trust me or not. She'll be down in a minute, her mum said, smiling warmly. She was a little nervous. Nervous? Cora? I barely had time to process that before the door creaked open. And then my breath stuttered. Cora stepped out, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Her usual oversized hoodie and jeans were gone, replaced by a dress that hugged her figure perfectly. flowing around her legs like silk. Her fiery red hair was swept up with a few loose tendrils framing her face. Her thick-rimmed glasses were still there, but instead of making her look studious, they made her look breathtakingly unique. She avoided my gaze, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "Stop staring." "Not possible," I muttered, still trying to remember how to breathe. Her mum sighed dreamily. "Oh, you two look so good together." Her dad grunted. "Have her home by midnight." Cora groaned. "Dad," I grinned, extending my arm. Shall we?" She hesitated, then hooked her hand through mine. I swore I felt electricity zip up my spine, my self-control fraying thread by thread. At the party, I was aware of every envious glance sent our way. Guys who had once called her an ice queen were now watching her like they had just noticed she existed. But she wasn't paying attention to any of them. She was laughing with me, dancing with me, smiling at me. And somewhere between the music, the flashing lights, and the way she kept unconsciously leaning toward me, I knew I was so screwed. I led her outside onto the balcony, away from the crowd. The cool night air brushed against my skin as I turned to face her. "Cora," I started, rubbing the back of my neck. But before I could finish, she tilted her head up and kissed me. Software. Quick. Completely unexpected. For the first time that night, I was the one left speechless. She pulled back slightly, searching my face. "Does that answer your question, whatever it is?" I stared at her for a second, then let out a breathless chuckle. "Yeah," I said, cupping her cheek. "Yeah, I think it does." And then I kissed her back.
The door jingled softly as I stepped inside the bakery, exhausted from a late meeting with my academic advisor. I had spent the last hour discussing my scholarship and how I was finally back on track. But right now, all I wanted was to crawl into bed. But then I saw them. My dad was standing by the counter, his hands dusted with flour, patiently guiding Charles through kneading a batch of dough. The sight made me freeze. Charles, the Charles clock, heir to a billion-dollar empire, was standing in our tiny flour-covered kitchen, sleeves rolled up, listening intently as my dad explained the importance of technique. His usually pristine appearance was a mess. His black shirt dusted white, his hair slightly disheveled, a streak of flour smudged across his cheek. And he was smiling, a warm, genuine smile, not the smirk he usually wore. Something in my chest tightened. I should have been used to seeing him here by now. He had become a fixture in our home, seamlessly fitting into our family routine. But this, watching my dad, who had always been wary of him, teach him something so close to his heart, it was different. It was everything. I felt my eyes burn, a sudden wave of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Charles must have felt my gaze because he looked up. Our eyes met, and without thinking, I mouthed the words that had been sitting on my tongue for weeks. "I love you." For a second, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, his lips curved. He wiped his flour-covered hands on a towel, not caring about the mess, and mouthed back, "I love you too." Warmth bloomed in my chest, spreading through my entire body like a slow golden sunrise. And in that moment, standing in our tiny but growing bakery, watching the love of my life learn how to make bread from my father, I knew I was home.